The morning sun cast long shadows across the Kandahar airfield as Lieutenant Colonel Sarah, Viper, Chen walked toward her A-10 Thunderbolt II. The distinctive twin-engine aircraft sat like a sleeping predator on the tarmac, its GAU-8 Avenger cannon pointing toward the horizon like an accusing finger. Sarah had flown over 300 combat missions in her 8-year career, but something about today felt different. The intelligence briefings had been sparse, communications choppy, and the entire base seemed to hum with an undercurrent of tension that made her skin crawl. "Another milk run, Viper?" called out Staff Sergeant Martinez as he completed his final inspection of the aircraft's ordnance. The A-10 was loaded with a full complement of AGM-65 Maverick missiles, unguided rockets, and enough 30 depleted uranium rounds to turn an entire armored division into scrap metal. Sarah shook her head, adjusting her flight helmet. "Something tells me today won't be routine, Martinez. The brass has been too quiet, and when they get quiet, it usually means someone's about to have a very bad day." The pre-flight inspection revealed nothing unusual. The Warthog was in perfect condition, as always. Sarah had personally overseen every maintenance cycle on this particular aircraft for the past 2 years. She knew every rivet, every wire, every system like it was an extension of her own body. The A-10 might not be the fastest or prettiest aircraft in the Air Force inventory, but it was built for one purpose: close air support. And Sarah Chen was the best close air support pilot in the entire theater of operations. As she climbed into the cockpit, her radio crackled to life. "Viper 17, this is Tower. You have priority clearance for immediate takeoff. Proceed to holding pattern Bravo 7 and await further instructions." "Copy, Tower. Viper 17 rolling." The twin turbofan engines spun up with their characteristic whine, and Sarah felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with every takeoff. The accelerated down the runway, its massive engines pushing the heavily armored aircraft skyward with surprising grace. Within minutes, she was cruising at 15,000 feet, the Afghan landscape spreading out below like a brown and tan patchwork quilt. "Viper 17, this is Command. We have a developing situation requiring immediate close air support. 381 SEAL Team is currently conducting a high-value target extraction in Sector 77 Alpha. Intelligence indicates significant enemy presence in the area." Sarah's blood ran cold. 381 was one of the most elite SEAL teams in the entire Navy. They didn't call for air support unless something had gone catastrophically wrong. "Command, what's the nature of the situation?" Team Leader Petty Officer First Class Marcus Rodriguez reported they have successfully acquired the target, but enemy forces have surrounded their position. Current estimates suggest between 200 and 300 Taliban fighters with heavy weapons, including RPGs and possibly anti-aircraft systems. The extraction zone is compromised, and they need immediate close air support to open an escape corridor. The gravity of the situation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Nearly 400 of America's finest warriors were trapped in enemy territory, surrounded by overwhelming odds. Every second of delay could mean the difference between a successful mission and a massacre that would make Black Hawk Down look like a minor skirmish. "Command, what are my rules of engagement?" "Weapons free, Viper 17. Anything that moves in that sector and isn't wearing American uniforms is a legitimate target. Be advised, satellite imagery shows the enemy has positioned heavy weapons in civilian structures. Collateral damage is authorized if necessary to save American lives." Sarah banked the A-10 toward Sector 77 Alpha, pushing the throttles forward. The Warthog might not be supersonic, but its maximum speed of over 400 miles per hour would get her to the battle zone in less than 10 minutes. As she flew, she reviewed everything she knew about the terrain. Sector 77 Alpha was a small village nestled in a valley between two ridgelines, with limited approaches and even fewer escape routes. If the SEALs were truly surrounded, they would need surgical precision to create an opening without killing the very men she was trying to save. "Viper 17, this is Overwatch. We have eyes on the target area. Enemy forces have established a complete perimeter around the village center. Our boys are holed up in a compound approximately 200 meters from the primary extraction zone. Heavy fighting in progress." Sarah switched to the SEAL team's frequency. 381, this is Viper 17. I'm your close air support. What's your situation?" The response came immediately, punctuated by the sound of automatic weapons fire. "Viper, this is Rodriguez. We've got approximately 300 tangos with us completely surrounded. They've got RPGs, heavy machine guns, and at least 2 recoilless rifles. We've taken casualties and we're running low on ammunition. We need you to clear us a path to the extraction point, but be careful. They've got fighters positioned in almost every building in this village. Copy, Rodriguez. I'm 2 minutes out. Mark your position with infrared strobes and keep your heads down. I'm going to make some noise. Sarah armed her weapon systems and began her descent. Through her targeting pod, she could see the village spread out below. Muzzle flashes winked like deadly stars from dozens of positions around the central compound where the SEALs were trapped. The enemy had indeed surrounded them completely, with overlapping fields of fire that would make any attempt to escape a suicide mission. But Sarah Chen hadn't earned the call sign Viper by backing down from impossible odds. She had earned it by being the most precise, most deadly close air support pilot in the entire Air Force. And today, nearly 400 American warriors were counting on her to prove it once again. The A-10 dove toward the valley like a mechanical bird of prey, its pilot's eyes already selecting targets and calculating firing solutions. The real battle was about to begin, and Sarah Chen was going to show these Taliban fighters exactly why the A-10 Thunderbolt II was known as the Warthog. Sometimes, being ugly and mean was exactly what the situation required. Below, the SEALs heard the distinctive sound of twin turbofan engines approaching, and for the first time in hours, they allowed themselves to hope. Their guardian angel was inbound, and she was flying the most feared close air support aircraft ever built. The rescue was about to begin. Sarah's first pass over the village was purely reconnaissance, but it had the desired psychological effect. The distinctive sound of the A-10's twin engines echoed through the valley like thunder, and she could see enemy fighters scrambling for cover through her targeting systems. The Warthog's reputation preceded it in this part of Afghanistan. Every Taliban fighter knew the sound meant death from above was coming. Rodriguez, I count at least 50 muzzle flashes around your position. They've got you surrounded tighter than I thought. I'm seeing heavy weapons positions on the ridgelines east and west of your compound, plus at least a dozen fighting positions in the buildings around the village center. Copy, Viper. We've identified the primary threats. There's a recoilless rifle team in the blue building approximately 100 meters to our north. Machine gun nest in the minaret of the mosque to our east. And they've got an RPG team that keeps moving between the buildings to our south. Sarah banked the A-10 into a wide circle, studying the tactical situation through her multispectral targeting system. The enemy had chosen their positions well, using the village's buildings and the natural terrain to create interlocking fields of fire. Any attempt by the SEALs to move toward the extraction point would expose them to devastating crossfire from multiple directions. But Sarah had been trained to solve exactly this type of problem. The A-10 wasn't just a flying gun. It was a precision instrument designed to provide surgical close air support in exactly these circumstances. The key was to systematically eliminate the enemy's ability to coordinate their defense while creating a corridor for the SEALs to escape. Rodriguez, I'm going to work the outer perimeter first, then clear you a path to the extraction zone. Keep your IR strobes active and maintain radio contact. If anything goes wrong, I need to know immediately. Roger, Viper, we'll keep our heads down. Sarah lined up her first attack run on the eastern ridgeline, where satellite imagery had identified 2 heavy weapons positions. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon was the A-10's primary weapon, a 7-barrel rotary cannon that fired 30 depleted uranium rounds at a rate of nearly 4,000 rounds per minute. Each round was designed to penetrate tank armor. Against personnel and light structures, the effect was devastating. The A-10 dove toward the ridgeline at a steep angle, its armored cockpit protecting Sarah from small arms fire as she closed to within 500 meters of her target. Through the targeting system, she could see Taliban fighters scrambling around what appeared to be a Soviet-era DSHK heavy machine gun. Time to announce my arrival, Sarah muttered, pressing the trigger. The GAU-8 erupted with its characteristic roar, a sound like the world's largest chainsaw cutting through steel. A stream of 30 rounds chewed through the enemy position, turning the heavy machine gun into twisted metal and eliminating the fighters manning it in less than 3 seconds. The depleted uranium rounds continued through the position and into the rock face behind it, sending up clouds of pulverized stone and dust. Sarah pulled up from her attack run and immediately banked, toward the second position on the eastern ridge. The psychological effect of the first attack was immediate. She could see enemy fighters abandoning their positions and running for cover. But discipline reasserted itself quickly, and muzzle flashes began winking from new positions as the Taliban attempted to track the attacking aircraft. "Good hits, Viper," Rodriguez's voice crackled over the radio. "You just eliminated the machine gun nest that was keeping us pinned down on our eastern flank, but be advised, they're repositioning and we're seeing movement toward the village center." Sarah lined up her second attack run, this time targeting a cluster of buildings where thermal imaging showed significant enemy activity. Instead of the cannon, she selected one of her AGM-65 Maverick missiles, a fire-and-forget weapon with a 65-pound warhead designed to destroy armored vehicles. "Rodriguez, I'm going hot with a Maverick. Danger close, keep everyone down." The missile streaked away from the A-10's wing pylon, its infrared seeker locked onto the heat signature of what appeared to be a generator or vehicle engine inside one of the buildings. The warhead detonated with tremendous force, collapsing the entire structure and sending a column of smoke and debris high into the air. But Sarah's celebration was short-lived. Her threat warning system suddenly came alive with audio alarms, indicating that someone had just locked onto her aircraft with a surface-to-air missile system. Sam, launch! Sam, launch!" she called out, throwing the A-10 into a hard left turn while dispensing chaff and flares to confuse any incoming missiles. The Warthog's heavy armor and redundant systems made it one of the most survivable aircraft ever built, but even an A-10 couldn't survive a direct hit from a modern surface-to-air missile. A streak of white smoke reached up from the village, passing less than 100 meters behind the A-10's tail. Someone down there had just fired a shoulder-launched surface-to-air missile at her aircraft, and they had come uncomfortably close to hitting their target. "Viper, be advised, we just saw the missile launch from the minaret of the mosque. Looks like they've got at least one MANPADS team in there," Rodriguez called out. Sarah gritted her teeth. Attacking a mosque was always politically sensitive, even when it was being used as a military position by enemy forces. But the lives of nearly 400 American servicemen outweighed any political considerations. If the enemy was using religious buildings as military positions, those buildings became legitimate military targets. "Copy, Rodriguez. I'm going to neutralize that threat before making another pass." She banked the A-10 toward the mosque, selecting rockets from her weapons menu. The LAU-131 rocket pods mounted under her wings each carried 7 unguided Hydra 70 rockets with high-explosive warheads. Unlike the precision-guided Maverick missiles, these rockets were area-effect weapons designed to saturate a target area with explosive force. The A-10 dove toward the mosque at a shallow angle, Sarah's thumb hovering over the rocket release button. Through her targeting system, she could see movement in the minaret and what appeared to be the launch signature of another surface-to-air missile system being prepared. "Time to even the odds," she said, pressing the button. 7 rockets streaked away from the A-10 in rapid succession, their smoke trails drawing white lines across the sky as they arced toward the mosque. The warheads detonated in a rippling cascade of explosions that brought down the entire minaret and collapsed a significant portion of the mosque's main structure. But even as she pulled up from her attack run, Sarah knew the battle was far from over. The enemy still had the SEALs completely surrounded, and she had used only a fraction of her available ordnance. The hardest part was still ahead, creating a corridor through the village that would allow the SEALs to reach their extraction point without being cut down by crossfire from the remaining enemy positions. "Rodriguez, what's your status? I've cleared your eastern flank and eliminated the SAM threat, but you're still surrounded." "Copy, Viper. We're holding position and treating casualties. We count at least 2 KIA and 5 wounded, but we're still combat effective. The extraction bird is holding at 10 minutes out, but we need a clear route to the LZ." Sarah studied the tactical display, calculating distances and angles of fire. The extraction landing zone was approximately 400 meters south of the SEAL's current position, across open ground that was covered by at least a dozen enemy fighting positions. A conventional attack would require her to suppress every single position simultaneously, which was impossible with her current ordnance load. But Sarah Chen hadn't become the best close air support pilot in theater by thinking conventionally. She had an idea, but it would require perfect timing and a level of precision that would push both her and her aircraft to their absolute limits. The rescue was about to get a lot more complicated. Sarah's plan was audacious and dangerous, but it was the only way to save the surrounded SEALs. Instead of trying to eliminate every enemy position individually, she would create a wall of destruction that would force the Taliban fighters to take cover while simultaneously obscuring their vision with smoke and debris. This would give the SEALs a narrow window to break out and reach the extraction point. Rodriguez, I need you to listen carefully. I'm going to lay down a curtain of fire along your escape route, but the timing has to be perfect. When I give you the signal, you and your men are going to have exactly 90 seconds to reach the LZ before the enemy recovers and reestablishes their firing positions. Copy, Viper. We'll be ready. What do you need from us? Mark your route to the extraction point with infrared strobes, but don't activate them until I'm on my final approach. I don't want the enemy to know where you're planning to go until the last possible second. And Rodriguez. Yes, ma'am. When I give the word to move, your people need to run like their lives depend on it. Because they do. Sarah banked the A-10 into position for her attack run, selecting her remaining ordnance carefully. She had 4 Maverick missiles left, plus 2 full rocket pods and nearly 800 rounds of 30 ammunition. The key was to sequence her attacks so that the explosions would create a continuous barrier of fire and smoke along the SEALs' escape route. Through her targeting system, she identified the primary threats: a heavy machine gun position in a 2-story building directly between the SEALs and the extraction zone, an RPG team that had taken position behind a low stone wall, and at least 6 rifle positions in the buildings flanking the route. Each position would have to be neutralized in rapid succession to prevent the enemy from coordinating their response. Overwatch, this is Viper 17. I'm beginning my final attack sequence. Confirm extraction bird is standing by. Copy, Viper. Extraction bird is 5 minutes out and ready for immediate pickup. Sarah pushed the A-10's throttles forward and began her descent. The aircraft accelerated toward the village at maximum speed, its heavily armored fuselage shrugging off small arms fire from the ground. At 2,000 feet, she fired her first Maverick missile at the 2-story building housing the heavy machine gun position. The building erupted in flame and debris as the 65-pound warhead detonated, collapsing the entire structure and eliminating the machine gun team. But Sarah was already lining up her next target, a cluster of single-story buildings where thermal imaging showed multiple enemy fighters. Her second Maverick struck the center of the complex, the explosion triggering secondary blasts as stored ammunition cooked off. A pillar of black smoke rose from the ruins, creating exactly the kind of visual obstruction Sarah needed for her plan to work. Rodriguez, activate your strobes. You are cleared to move in 30 seconds. Sarah dove the A-10 to within 300 feet of the ground, well within the effective range of small arms fire, but the altitude was necessary for the precision she needed. Her third Maverick missile eliminated another building complex, while her fourth took out what appeared to be a vehicle-mounted heavy weapon. But now came the most dangerous part of her plan. She needed to use her rocket pods and cannon to create a continuous wall of explosions along the SEALs' escape route, which meant flying directly down the length of the valley at extremely low altitude while under fire from multiple directions. Rodriguez, move now. You have 90 seconds. Sarah triggered her first rocket pod, sending 7 Hydra rockets streaking toward a line of buildings on the eastern side of the escape route. The warheads detonated in rapid succession, bringing down walls and filling the air with smoke and debris. Immediately, she banked slightly left and fired her second rocket pod at positions on the western side of the route. The GAU-8 cannon roared continuously as Sarah flew the length of the valley, her 30 rounds chewing through buildings, vehicles, and fighting positions with devastating effect. Enemy fighters dove for cover as depleted uranium rounds punched through walls and concrete barriers like they were made of paper. But the enemy wasn't helpless. Automatic weapons fire reached up from dozens of positions, and Sarah felt the distinctive impact of bullets striking her aircraft. The A-10's titanium armor bathtub protected her from most small arms fire, but several rounds found their way through gaps in the protection, damaging non-critical systems. Her left engine began to smoke as hydraulic fluid sprayed from severed lines, and her flight controls became sluggish. Warning lights illuminated across her instrument panel, but the Warthog kept flying. It was designed to survive exactly this kind of damage and continue fighting. "Viper, we're moving. We can see the LZ." Rodriguez's voice was barely audible over the sound of explosions and gunfire. Through her targeting system, Sarah could see the SEALs breaking cover and sprinting across the open ground toward the extraction point. They moved in perfect formation, covering each other as they advanced through the smoke and chaos she had created. But even as they ran, enemy fighters were beginning to recover from the shock of her attack. Muzzle flashes began to wink through the smoke as Taliban fighters tried to engage the escaping Americans. Sarah immediately banked the damaged A-10 around for another pass, determined to keep the enemy suppressed until every SEAL reached safety. "Rodriguez, you've got fighters trying to flank you from the north. I'm coming around again." With her missiles expended and most of her rockets gone, Sarah had only her cannon and her last few rockets remaining. But the GAU-8 was the A-10's primary weapon for a reason. She dove toward the northern edge of the village, where thermal imaging showed enemy fighters moving to intercept the escaping SEALs. The cannon erupted again, its distinctive roar echoing through the valley as 30 rounds tore through a group of Taliban fighters who had been trying to set up a blocking position. The depleted uranium rounds continued through their targets and into the buildings behind them, sending up clouds of dust and debris. But Sarah's left engine was getting worse. Oil pressure was dropping rapidly, and the engine was beginning to vibrate badly enough to shake the entire aircraft. She had maybe one more attack run left before she would be forced to abort and try to make it back to base on one engine. "Viper, we're at the LZ. Extraction bird is inbound," Rodriguez called out. Through her targeting system, Sarah could see the SEALs reaching the extraction point just as a U-60 Black Hawk helicopter swept into the valley. The aircraft came in fast and low, its door gunners already engaging enemy positions with their mounted machine guns. But even as the helicopter began to land, Sarah spotted a new threat. A Taliban fighter with an RPG launcher was taking position on a rooftop overlooking the extraction zone, clearly intending to shoot down the rescue helicopter with the SEALs aboard. Sarah didn't hesitate. Despite her damaged engine and failing systems, she dove the A-10 directly toward the rooftop, lining up the RPG team with her cannon. The range was point-blank, less than 200 meters, well within the effective range of the enemy's small arms fire. Automatic weapons fire erupted from the rooftop and surrounding buildings as Sarah bore down on her target. Bullets struck her aircraft from multiple directions, and she felt the A-10 shudder as more systems were damaged. But she kept the aircraft steady, her finger tightening on the trigger. The GAU-8 fired a short burst, and the RPG team disappeared in a cloud of smoke and debris. But the effort had cost her. Sarah felt a sharp pain in her left shoulder as a bullet found its way through a gap in the cockpit armor, and her right engine began to smoke as well. "Extraction complete, all personnel aboard." Rodriguez's voice was filled with relief and gratitude. "Viper, we owe you our lives." Sarah pulled the damaged A-10 into a climb, both engines now running rough and multiple warning lights illuminating her instrument panel. But she had accomplished her mission. Nearly 400 American warriors were safe, and the enemy had been dealt a devastating blow. "Just doing my job, Rodriguez. Get those boys home safe." As the Black Hawk disappeared into the distance carrying its precious cargo of rescued SEALs, Sarah turned her damaged aircraft toward home, praying that the Warthog would hold together long enough to make it back to base. The hardest part of the mission was still ahead, surviving the flight home with a critically damaged aircraft. The flight back to Kandahar airfield quickly became a battle for survival. Sarah's left engine had seized completely, trailing black smoke and vibrating so badly that she had to shut it down to prevent it from tearing itself apart and taking the rest of the aircraft with it. Her right engine was running rough, losing power steadily as damaged fuel lines leaked precious aviation fuel into the slipstream. "Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is Viper 17 declaring an in-flight emergency," Sarah transmitted, her voice steady despite the dire circumstances. "I have a single engine failure, multiple system malfunctions, and am losing hydraulic pressure. Requesting priority landing and emergency services standing by." "Viper 17, this is Kandahar Tower. We copy your emergency. You are cleared for immediate approach on any runway. Emergency services are already rolling. What is your current position and souls on board?" Tower, I'm approximately 40 miles northwest of the field, flying on one engine with degraded flight controls. One soul on board. Be advised, I may not be able to make a conventional landing. Sarah fought to keep the A-10 airborne as she ran through her emergency checklists. The aircraft was designed to survive massive battle damage, but she was pushing those limits. Her hydraulic pressure had dropped to almost nothing, which meant her flight controls were operating on manual reversion, requiring significant physical strength to move the control surfaces. Blood from her shoulder wound was beginning to soak through her flight suit, and she could feel herself getting weaker. The bullet had apparently nicked an artery, and she was losing blood faster than she had initially realized. But she couldn't think about that now. She had to focus on getting her aircraft home. The A-10's design philosophy of redundancy and survivability was keeping her alive. Even with one engine dead and most of her hydraulics gone, the aircraft was still flying. The massive control surfaces could be moved manually, and the redundant flight control systems were compensating for the damaged primary systems. Viper 17, we have you on radar. Maintain current heading and descent rate. We're clearing all traffic from your approach path. Sarah could see Kandahar airfield in the distance, its runways and taxiways clearly visible against the brown Afghan landscape. But she was still 20 miles out, and her remaining engine was beginning to run even rougher. Oil pressure was dropping steadily, and the engine temperature was climbing toward the red line. Tower, I'm going to lose my remaining engine before I reach the field. I need options for emergency landing sites. There was a pause before the controller responded. Viper 17, we have a forward operating base approximately 10 miles ahead of your current position. It has a short runway that should be adequate for emergency landing. Fob Mitchell, frequency 127.5. Contact them immediately. Sarah switched to the emergency frequency. Fob Mitchell, this is Viper 17 declaring an in-flight emergency. I need immediate emergency landing clearance. I have a single engine failure and am losing my remaining engine. Viper 17, this is Mitchell Tower. We copy your emergency. You are cleared for immediate landing on runway 09. Be advised, our runway is only 3,500 feet long, but it should be adequate for your aircraft. Emergency services are standing by. 3,500 feet was short for an A-10, especially one that would be coming in fast with degraded flight controls. But it was her only option. Her remaining engine was running so rough now that she could feel the entire aircraft shaking. As she began her approach to Fob Mitchell, Sarah's radio crackled with a familiar voice. Viper 17, this is Rodriguez. We just heard about your situation. You saved our lives today, and we're praying you make it home safe. Despite everything, Sarah smiled. Thanks, Rodriguez. Take care of your boys. She lined up with the short runway at Fob Mitchell, fighting to control the damaged aircraft as it descended through 3,000 feet. The A-10 was flying like a truck with square wheels, but it was still flying. Her approach speed was higher than normal because of her degraded flight controls, which meant she would need every foot of that 3,500-foot runway. At 1,000 feet, her remaining engine finally gave up. The turbofan seized with a loud bang that she could hear even through her helmet, and suddenly, the only sound was the whistle of wind through her damaged aircraft. She was now flying a 30,000-pound glider with the aerodynamic properties of a flying brick. Tower, I've lost my remaining engine. I'm coming in dead stick. Copy Viper 17. You're cleared for emergency landing. Fire trucks are standing by. Sarah lowered her landing gear manually, using the emergency extension system since her hydraulics were completely gone. The gear extended with a reassuring thunk, but she had no way to know if they were properly locked in position. She would find out when she tried to land. The runway at Fob Mitchell rushed up toward her as she glided the A-10 toward touchdown. She was coming in fast, probably 20 knots above normal landing speed, but there was nothing she could do about it. Without engines or adequate flight controls, she was committed to whatever speed she had. The A-10 touched down hard on the runway, bouncing once before settling onto the concrete with a screech of tires. Sarah immediately deployed her drag chute and stood on the brakes, feeling the aircraft decelerate rapidly. But the runway was short, and she was running out of distance fast. With 500 feet of runway remaining, the A-10 was still moving at 60 knots. Sarah made a split-second decision and steered the aircraft off the runway onto the sandy ground beyond, using the soft terrain to help slow her down. The landing gear held, and the aircraft finally came to a stop in a cloud of dust and smoke. Sarah sat in her cockpit for a moment, hardly believing she was still alive. She had just survived one of the most harrowing combat missions of her career, followed by an emergency landing that should have killed her. But the A-10 had brought her home, just as it had been designed to do. Emergency vehicles surrounded her aircraft within minutes, and medical personnel were climbing up to her cockpit before she could even shut down her systems. "Ma'am, we need to get you to medical immediately. You've lost a lot of blood." As the medics helped her out of the cockpit, Sarah looked back at her battered A-10. The aircraft was riddled with bullet holes, one engine was completely destroyed, and hydraulic fluid was pooled beneath the fuselage. But it had done its job. It had kept her alive long enough to save nearly 400 American warriors and bring her home safely. "You did good, old girl," she whispered to the aircraft as the medics loaded her onto a stretcher. Word of the successful rescue mission was already spreading throughout the base. The SEALs of Team 381 had been extracted safely, with no additional casualties during the rescue. The intelligence they had gathered from their high-value target would prove invaluable in future operations. And Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen had once again proven why she was considered the best close air support pilot in theater. But for Sarah, the real victory was much simpler. Nearly 400 American servicemen were going home to their families because she had been in the right place at the right time, flying the right aircraft. In the end, that was all that mattered. 6 months later, Lieutenant Colonel Sarah, Viper, Chen stood in the pristine corridors of the Pentagon, her dress blue uniform immaculate despite the slight stiffness in her left shoulder that would always remind her of that day in Afghanistan. The wound had healed completely, but the doctors said she would always have limited mobility in that arm. It was a small price to pay for saving nearly 400 lives. "Colonel Chen, they're ready for you," announced the aide, a young Air Force captain who looked barely old enough to drive, let alone work in the Pentagon. Sarah nodded and followed him down the marble-floored hallway toward the ceremony room. The rescue of SEAL Team 381 had become legendary throughout the special operations community. The after-action reports had been classified at the highest levels, but word had spread through unofficial channels about the female A-10 pilot who had single-handedly broken a Taliban siege and saved an entire SEAL team from annihilation. The intelligence gathered during the mission had led to the capture of 3 high-value targets and the disruption of a major Taliban offensive that could have cost hundreds of coalition lives. The mission had been a complete success, but the real story was about courage under fire and the refusal to abandon fellow Americans in danger. As Sarah entered the ceremony room, she saw familiar faces in the audience. Petty Officer First Class Marcus Rodriguez sat in the front row, now wearing the uniform of a chief petty officer. His promotion had come through just weeks after the rescue mission, along with a Silver Star for his leadership during the siege. Next to him sat 12 other members of SEAL Team 381, all of whom had volunteered to attend the ceremony despite their current deployment schedules. The room fell silent as the Secretary of the Air Force approached the podium. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today to honor extraordinary heroism in the face of overwhelming odds. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, call sign Viper, exemplifies the very best traditions of the United States Air Force and the warrior spirit that defines our nation's defenders." Sarah stood at attention as the citation was read aloud. The words seemed surreal: extraordinary heroism, complete disregard for personal safety, decisive action under fire, saving the lives of 381 American servicemen. It was strange to hear her actions described in such formal language when, in her mind, she had simply been doing her job. Lieutenant Colonel Chen's actions during the rescue of SEAL Team 381 represent the highest ideals of military service. Flying a damaged aircraft through intense enemy fire, she provided close air support that enabled the successful extraction of an entire special operations team that had been surrounded and facing annihilation. The Secretary stepped forward with a small blue box containing the Air Force Cross, the second highest decoration for valor that could be awarded to Air Force personnel. For extraordinary heroism in connection with military operations against an armed enemy, the President of the United States takes pride in presenting the Air Force Cross to Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen. As the medal was pinned to her uniform, Sarah thought about the men she had helped save that day. Rodriguez had been right when he said they owed her their lives, but she felt like she owed them something too. They had reminded her why she had become a pilot in the first place, to protect the people who couldn't protect themselves, to stand between America's enemies and the warriors who served on the front lines. After the ceremony, Rodriguez approached her with a broad smile. "Colonel, I can't tell you how proud we are to see you get the recognition you deserve. You saved every one of us that day." "Rodriguez, you and your team did the hard work. I just provided taxi service," Sarah replied with a grin. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that was the most expensive taxi ride in military history, and it was worth every penny." The other SEALs crowded around, each wanting to shake hands with the pilot who had risked everything to bring them home. They told her stories about their families, their plans for the future, their gratitude for being alive to see their children grow up. Each story reinforced what Sarah had always known: military service wasn't about medals or recognition. It was about the person standing next to you in the fight. Later that evening, Sarah found herself in a quiet bar near the Pentagon, sharing drinks with Rodriguez and several other members of his team. The conversation had turned from war stories to family photos, from tactical discussions to plans for retirement. These were good men, dedicated professionals who had volunteered for the most dangerous missions their country could offer. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Rodriguez said, staring into his beer. "What would have happened if you hadn't been there that day? We were surrounded, running out of ammunition, and facing odds that should have been impossible to overcome. Without you, we would have made our stand in that compound and fought until the end. Some of us might have made it out, but most of us wouldn't have." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. She had run the tactical scenarios herself many times during her recovery. Without air support, the SEALs would have been forced to attempt a breakout on foot, across open ground, against an enemy force that outnumbered them almost 10-1. The casualties would have been catastrophic. "But that's the thing about military service," she replied. "None of us fight alone. When you needed air support, I was there. When I needed a landing field, Fob Mitchell was there. When you guys need intelligence, the CIA is there. When America needs defending, all of us are there. That's how it's supposed to work." Rodriguez raised his beer in a toast. "To Sarah Viper Chen, the finest close air support pilot who ever lived." "To SEAL Team 381, Sarah replied, "the finest warriors America has ever produced." As they drank, Sarah reflected on the strange turns her career had taken. She had joined the Air Force because she loved flying, but she had stayed because she loved the people she served with. The military was more than a job. It was a calling, a commitment to something larger than yourself. The rescue of SEAL Team 381 had made her famous within military circles, but it had also reinforced her understanding of what service really meant. It wasn't about being a hero or earning medals. It was about being there when your fellow warriors needed you most, regardless of the personal cost. The A-10 Thunderbolt II that had carried her through that harrowing mission was now on display at the National Museum of the United States Air Force. The aircraft had been too damaged for return to service, but it had been preserved as a testament to the durability and effectiveness of American military engineering. Visitors could see the bullet holes, the battle damage, and the scars of combat that told the story of one remarkable day in Afghanistan. But for Sarah, the real memorial wasn't the aircraft in the museum or the medal on her uniform. It was the knowledge that 381 American warriors had gone home to their families because she had been willing to risk everything to save them. That was the true measure of success in military service. Not the battles you won or the medals you earned, but the lives you protected and the people you brought home safely. As the evening wound down and the SEALs prepared to return to their hotels, Rodriguez pulled Sarah aside one final time. "Ma'am, I need you to know something. Every one of us carries a piece of what you did that day. When we're in a tough spot, when the odds are against us, we remember that there's always someone watching our backs. You gave us more than our lives that day. You gave us faith." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes, but she blinked them back. "Rodriguez, you guys gave me something too. You reminded me why this job matters. Every mission, every flight, every time I strap into that cockpit, I remember that there are people like you depending on me to be at my best." As they parted ways that night, Sarah knew that she would carry the memory of SEAL Team 381 with her for the rest of her career. They had all been changed by that day in Afghanistan, bound together by shared danger and mutual sacrifice. It was the kind of bond that could only be forged in combat, and it would last for the rest of their lives. The rescue of SEAL Team 381 had become more than just a successful mission. It had become a reminder of what American military service was really about. Ordinary people doing extraordinary things to protect their fellow warriors and defend their nation. It was a story that would be told for generations, not because it was unique, but because it represented the very best of what America's military could achieve when courage, skill, and determination came together in service of a noble cause. And somewhere in Afghanistan, in a valley where a desperate battle had once raged, the wind now blew quietly through the ruins of buildings destroyed by 30 cannon fire and Maverick missiles. The village had been rebuilt, the people had returned to their normal lives, and the only evidence of that day's violence was the scattered pieces of metal that local children sometimes found while playing in the fields. But the memory of what had happened there would live on in the hearts and minds of the warriors who had fought and survived, and in the grateful nation they had sworn to protect and defend.